The 1800s is the century when modern politics as we know it came into being. It was a tumultuous era of revolution and counter-revolution, where political systems were tested and forged. Perhaps no series of events better defines this era than the European revolutions of 1848. These revolutions encapsulated the beginning of modernity and its three main political systems: liberalism, nationalism, and communism. In the 1800s, European countries were facing extreme changes due to the Industrial Revolution. New technologies revolutionized the way people lived and how society was organized. This technological revolution also came with political revolution. In 1848, popular revolts broke out across Europe. Christian monarchies and aristocratic dynasties had to deal with a wide array of challengers, from liberals to nationalists to socialists. In France, Austria, Germany, Italy, and more, revolutionaries rose up seeking to change the way their governments worked. These revolutionaries weren't a monolith. They consisted of people of different walks of life and had many different, and often contradictory, goals. Some were liberals, seeking to create governments favorable to capitalism and the bourgeoisie. Others were nationalists, desiring governments based on ethnic solidarity and common heritage. Others still were socialists, seeking governments that prioritized the interests of the working classes. These chaotic revolutions are more important than you think. The political systems that dominate the world today tested themselves here. So, what exactly were the revolutions of 1848, and what do they tell us about modern politics? All of that and more will be explained in this video. There are several parallels between the revolutions of 1848 and issues we face in the United States today. Though the historical context is different, we're seeing how news coverage and political polarization create information silos and diminish meaningful discourse. That's why I'm working with Ground News, an independent and nonpartisan platform designed to solve this problem. Their app and website gather related news from around the world and across the political spectrum, giving every reader access to the same information. That way, you can critically analyze the world we're living in without the influence of media bubbles. Ground News is so dedicated to this mission, they created an entire feed called The Blind Spot. It surfaces important news missing from left and right media bubbles, so we have a more comprehensive understanding of the world. For example, hardly anyone on the left is talking about a Gallup poll showing confidence in the media has fallen to a new low ahead of the presidential election. And if you lean right, you may have missed Oklahoma defending the state's likely purchase of Trump-endorsed Bibles for schools. When I click into the story, I get a visual breakdown of each news source's bias, credibility, and ownership, so I know where these perspectives are coming from. Ground News gives me the tools to look at these stories and come to my own conclusions about them. In a time when staying informed is more important than ever, Ground News is fixing what's broken in the news landscape. Go to ground.news/Pax or scan my QR code to stay informed through diverse and credible sources. My viewers get a massive 50% off their Top Vantage plan. It's the same one I use to help with research and stay accurately informed on the most pressing issues today. I only promote brands I trust, and I think Ground News is a platform you can trust too. Political philosophy is an ever-changing and evolving field of thought. In the medieval era, political life revolved around monarchies and aristocracies. People of the time period considered these systems as an acceptable and even desirable way to organize society. But by the late 1700s, monarchies were facing challenges from new political forces. A growing number of people criticized traditional monarchy as outdated and unable to meet the needs of the people it governed. Much of this followed from the improvement of technology. The common person was becoming wealthier and better educated than they were in past eras. Literacy rates increased and a growing share of the population was interested in politics. In other words, populations were becoming politicized. It was thus easier than ever for massive crowds of people to organize, gather, and use force to get concessions from the state. Perhaps the most important factor was the rise of the merchant or bourgeoisie class. The bourgeoisie are wealthy and powerful people who specialize in fields such as business, law, and journalism. They are separate from aristocracies and, often, in conflict with them for power. Aristocrats like Clemens von Metternich wrote of the bourgeoisie, "The classes where revolutionary agitation is marked are those of the wealthy, of genuine cosmopolitans who make sure of their own profits no matter what happens, of civil servants, of men of letters and of the legal profession, and amongst individuals responsible for public education. They attack the centuries-old heritage of all that is sacred and positive, and deny the values of the past to declare themselves masters of creation of the future." As Europe became wealthier and international capitalism developed, this bourgeoisie class gained greater political influence. It used this influence to increase its own power. The biggest examples of this came in the American and French revolutions. In both cases, the bourgeoisie class was at the leading edge of revolution against entrenched government systems, in order to create new systems that benefited themselves. In America, they succeeded, and created a country with no aristocracy and a constitution that protected capitalism. In France, on the other hand, the revolution was ultimately stopped through a combination of internal collapse and outside invasion. In Europe, in the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars, Christian monarchies tried to pick up the pieces of a chaotic and changing Europe. The governments of Austria, Britain, Russia, Prussia, and France worked together to create a new European order. They couldn't stop the changes that were happening due to industrialization, but they would at least try to manage them. No government wanted another revolutionary state going around killing monarchs and starting wars like revolutionary France did. But they had a problem. New, explosive breakthroughs in technology and science were changing the world faster than ever before. In historical terms, the early modern era was transitioning into the modern era. So, by the early 1800s, the Industrial Revolution was in full swing. Industry and new inventions were being developed at a pace no one could keep up with. Enormous factories and businesses sprang up across cities. Suddenly, societies that were based on agriculture for thousands of years became industrial, completely changing the economy and people's way of life. Millions of workers flocked from the countryside to cities to take advantage of new factory jobs. While this gave many people work, it also led to cramped and overcrowded cities. At the same time, advances in medicine vastly reduced child mortality rates. Thus, populations across Europe were exploding, while the conditions to support all these new people weren't yet in place. Between 1750 and 1800, populations across Europe increased by 50 to 100%. Population growth was so high that economists like Robert Malthus panicked and theorized that there soon wouldn't be enough food to feed all the people. At the time, these theories seemed to have some merit. Food shortages were so common in the 1840s that the decade earned the moniker the Hungry Forties. The infamous Irish potato famine occurred during this time, and famine in the 1840s would be a direct cause of the revolutions of 1848. This industrial age also led to increased competition between European empires. At this stage of history, Europe was still the center of world power. So to compete overseas, states became more centralized and completed the process of transitioning away from decentralized medieval states. Bureaucracies became more developed and militaries more professional and powerful. Due to industry and finance growing at explosive rates, money lenders and bankers gained extreme wealth and power. The growth of industry and capital required financial investment, so the power of money was more important than in previous eras. French historian Jacques Bourzoum wrote of the time period, "New machinery was expensive, and businessmen setting up even modest factories had to accumulate substantial capital through partnerships, loans from banks, or joint stock ventures." In countries like Britain and France, bankers became even more powerful than monarchs. The Rothschild banking dynasty, one of the most influential banking families of the time, had the maxim, "Let us control the money of a nation, and we care not who make its laws." At the same time, massive factories led to overcrowding in cities that put strain on social systems. It was common for factories to have bad working conditions. In many cases, they were dirty and dangerous. Famous writers like Charles Dickens wrote about the struggles the common man faced and made it a focus of his literature. Inevitably, workers got fed up and started demanding better working conditions. They wanted fewer hours, higher pay, and more safety protections. Critically, these events led to a change in philosophy within the working class. Many now saw that their interests and the interests of wealthy capitalists were not necessarily aligned. In the French Revolution, the Third Estate made up everyone who wasn't a cleric or aristocrat. But in the Industrial Revolution, as the power of the clergy and aristocracy declined, this Third Estate was becoming more and more divided. Meanwhile, political philosophies appeared that tried to chart a path forward for the Industrial Age. First, there was liberalism. This is an ideology focused on individual rights versus the collective group. Liberals sought to create a system favorable to capitalism that would protect the merchant class's privileges against interference from either aristocrats or the masses. Liberals wanted constitutions that would separate powers and grant rights. Liberalism is thus against aristocrats and monarchs, or really any one sovereign or ruler. Instead, elected representatives would be the basis of government. Liberals also sought secularism and the abolition of state religion, while some went further, seeking to eliminate religion from public life entirely. Another philosophy that appeared was socialism. Socialism comes in many varieties, but is usually defined by its goal to take power away from capitalists and aristocrats alike. Instead, it seeks to vest power in the working class. In extreme forms of socialism, like communism, society would have to be completely revolutionized. The old world would be totally thrown out. People's class identity would become their primary identity above all else. In France, for example, communist activists wanted to discard the French tricolor and replace it with a red communist flag. Many factory workers and artisans of the 19th century were attracted to socialism due to its promises to improve their position in society. Many people today think that socialism comes from the ideas of Karl Marx, but actually, socialistic ideas were already popular long before the Communist Manifesto was written. Far from inventing socialism, Marx was trying to twist it and co-opt it towards his own values. Finally, there was nationalism. Nationalism emphasized the importance of ethnic and religious identity over class identity. They wanted class collaboration, which contrasted with the class struggle of communism. In the nationalist worldview, a nation should be based on ethnic solidarity and shared history. Nationalists believe government should be based on the national will of the people. Many wanted national independence for their ethnic group, which posed a threat to multi-ethnic empires like Russia and Austria. All of these new political philosophies clashed with the aristocratic and dynastic order that was dominant in Europe for centuries. Monarchy was based on the philosophy that the king has an inherent God-given right to rule. Monarchy was seen for many as the stable and traditional form of government. Changing it to monarchists would be too revolutionary and dangerous. Just look at France, where so much death and chaos had occurred. But monarchs were themselves increasingly unable to deal with the challenges happening around them, especially the rising power of the bourgeoisie. Religious officials, who were often part of the state apparatus, also feared revolution due to the anti-religious elements of liberalism and communism. Catholics and Protestants favored keeping their state religions, while Jews and Freemasons supported policies meant to destroy Christian political power. So, Europe was dealing with industrialization, the rise of capitalism, new inventions and ideologies, and increased population. Democratic ideals clashed with aristocratic ideals. Individualist liberals clashed with collectivist nationalists. Should society be led by elections or a traditional aristocracy? Perhaps a combination of the two? These debates defined politics of the era. In the lead-up to revolution, discontent spread across Europe from an economic depression and increased urban unemployment. At the same time, crop failures caused a major famine spreading from Ireland to Poland. The first country to experience revolutionary unrest was France. The country was ruled by King Louis Philippe, the self-styled King of the French. He was a liberal monarch who had granted many concessions to revolutionary ideals. But it still wasn't enough. Revolutionaries, consisting of many different social groups, started an insurrection in Paris demanding a republic. Louis-Philippe admitted defeat without a fight and abdicated his throne. Afterwards, a new republican regime was created in France with universal male suffrage. The news of what happened in France rapidly spread across Europe. People with various grievances against their government suddenly saw that revolutionary change was possible, if they were willing to fight for it. Revolt quickly spread to Austria, Prussia, Hungary, Bohemia, and parts of Italy. These uprisings ranged from the wealthy classes to middle-class reformers to working-class radicals. There was also a strong nationalist current in Italy and Germany that dreamed of national unification. Keep in mind that Italy and Germany at the time still consisted of many small states and were not unified countries. Meanwhile, in the Austrian Habsburg Empire, many Hungarians and Slavs wanted independence or autonomy for their people. The results of the revolutions varied wildly by country. France's revolutionaries saw the most success, with the complete overthrow of the monarchy. In Denmark, absolute monarchy was abolished, but constitutional monarchy replaced it rather than a republic. Meanwhile, in Prussia, the powerful Junker aristocracy defeated the revolution completely and exiled its leading advocates. However, German politician and future Chancellor Otto von Bismarck took note of what the revolutionaries wanted. He integrated German national unification into his own goals, and in 1871 unified Germany under Prussian aristocratic leadership. He further enacted working reforms and welfare policies to appease the working class. This showed people that monarchs and aristocrats could be more adaptable than many thought. In Italy, national unification was defeated in 1848, but would happen decades later in 1871. Meanwhile, the Austrian Empire also crushed its revolution and remained a united empire. Russia, who didn't have a major revolution, used its army to help Austria put down its rebels. We thus see there was international solidarity between monarchies to hold their empires and the existing European order together. Ethnic tensions did remain in the Austrian Empire, but national independence for minorities was now off the table. The Catholic Habsburg dynasty remained in power. Most historians alive at the time considered the revolutions a failure. The historian George Hall Kirby notes, "Popular support for revolution dwindled when it became clear that liberals would do no more to solve the problems of the masses than conservatives had done." He writes that when radical leaders called for new insurrections in late 1849, only intellectuals, students, and professional revolutionaries answered the call. The lower classes remained by and large indifferent. Even in France, where the revolution established a republic, it was quickly turned into a quasi-monarchy by Napoleon III, nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte. A common theme in the failure was that many revolutionaries realized their differences were more extreme than previously thought. Nationalists, liberals, and communists all clashed on what their future society should look like. Early on, the line between liberals and nationalists was blurred. Many liberals were nationalists, and vice versa. However, as the two groups philosophically developed, extreme differences became apparent. The biggest divide emerged on the issues of race and religion. To nationalists, protecting their people's race and religion is an important political objective. But to liberals, these issues are irrelevant. Race and religion could disappear and they wouldn't care. Instead, their main focus is on protecting economic growth and money. To liberals, the rights of individuals trump the broader society's interests. To nationalists, the interests of society trump the rights of individuals. These differences remain to this very day. While the revolutions of 1848 did fail in creating new regimes, they did get concessions, and states had to consider popular opinion into their calculations more than ever before. Dynastic leaders now had to justify their rule to the people. Monarchs like Austria's Franz Joseph exemplified this when he said, "My job is to protect my people from their politicians." The consensus among historians is that the revolutions of 1848 were bourgeois revolutions. That is, revolutions primarily led by the upper classes in pursuit of their own interests. Despite the revolutions, monarchy remained a powerful and common form of government well into the 20th century. Governments learned a lot from the revolutions and built their societies in ways to prevent further revolution. The true downfall of monarchy came during World War I. The victory of the liberal powers of Britain, France, and the United States marked the end of monarchy as a relevant force in politics in the modern era. In the aftermath of World War I, communism and nationalism gained traction and even defeated liberalism. Russia went communist while Germany, Italy, and many other states went nationalist. However, World War II and the defeat of the Axis powers crippled nationalism on a global scale. Later, the Cold War crippled communism on a global scale. Liberalism has thus been the defining system of the West for decades. Both liberals and conservatives in countries like America and the UK operate within the liberal paradigm. But despite these victories of liberalism, the debate about what form of government is best for human society remains a heated debate that will never end. Maybe there is no one-size-fits-all answer. What works for one country or people may not work for another. In recent decades, the rise of China has proven that socialism still has life. At the same time, the rise of nationalist parties across Europe shows that many people still hunger for nationalist governments based on ethnic solidarity. One thing remains certain: the book of history is always being written, and men of action will decide its direction. This has been Pax, and thank you so much for watching. Please leave a comment letting me know your thoughts on all this. If you'd like to see more videos, please consider supporting the channel. Also, make sure to check out ground news through the links provided below. As always, I will see you in the next video.